Devoutly irreligious but proud of my race, I like to think I know a bit about what it feels like to be an Indian cricket lover in 2012, as opposed, that is, to being a lover of Indian cricket, a weakness to which, given that Indian cricket embodies the game's passions and subtleties like no other, I'm only too happy to confess. I too know what it is like to read a newspaper article about fellow members of my tribe. For the BCCI, read just about every Israeli government in recent memory, and react simultaneously with a shudder and a growl. Just because something shameful is done purportedly in our name doesn't mean the rest of the world should view this as proof of our consent, our morality, or even our fraternal forgiveness. I'm a cricket lover, not a nationalist. I like to think I love wisely as well as too well. As a journalist, the colleagues I've met from the Hindu Sun Times, the Times of India, India Today, Cricinfo, etc., and many others besides, have been among the most knowledgeable, erudite and enthusiastic I've ever encountered in any field. During the 2003 World Cup in Southern Africa, indeed, I felt more kinship with them than I did with my own countrymen, possibly because their love of the game, as I saw it, ran deeper. I'm grateful to have lived long enough to savour Bishan Bedi, Farooq Engineer and Mansoor Ali Khan, as well as Kapil Dev, Anil Kumble, Harbhajan Singh, Sachin Tendulkar, Rahul Dravid and MS Dhoni, as well as, above all for me personally, Virender Sehwag and VVS Laxman. I'm delighted that India is producing fast bowlers. Above all, I feel indebted, as an Englishman who still believes that the game, especially its test incarnation, to be the finest of all sporting means of expression, to the passion of Indian cricket lovers. Without it, I seriously doubt my lifelong obsession would have much of a future. As a spectator sport, it might not even have survived the 20th century. But what happens when that passion obscures sound judgment and betrays, perhaps, the principles of fair play? That I feel obliged to say all this is, of course, a reflection of the way cricket polarises. With its unique emphasis on the international rather than the domestic, it segments followers and even administrators into rival patriotic factions. Over the past half dozen years, I've experienced this divisiveness as a columnist for Cricinfo, the game's most widely read and, dare I say it, most comprehensive and authoritative publication. While many readers rise above national bias and respond with considerable perceptiveness, the majority in my experience are pretty blinkered, many seemingly out of patriotic, even racial loyalty. And the majority of the readership, by some considerable distance, is Indian. Journalistically, this is unfamiliar territory, knowing that a hail of invective will descend should I dare even hint that the BCCI, the IPL or Sachin Tendulkar are anything other than steadfast, honourable or flawless, though I hesitate to bracket the first two with the last. I must always watch my words. Never a bad thing. The benefits, I like to believe, are conspicuous. A greater rigour, a more dogged and energetic pursuit of the facts, enhanced sensitivity, and a less inflammatory or flippant choice of adjectives. Disinterest, as opposed to non-interest, is critical to all credible journalism, but especially so in this case. Anything that even smells of bias, and especially English bias, is liable to persuade the recipient of the ensuing ridicule that whoever came up with that venerable analogy about sticks and stones was completely bonkers. Right, excuses, alibi and overture over. With flagrant disrespect for running orders, let me deal with the second section of this discussion first. Does the internal legal structure of the BCCI need to change? Given its immense resources and the significance of cricket in Indian public life, should there be greater transparency and accountability, perhaps even public control? On all the evidence I have, the answer is precisely as it would be if the subject was pretty much any other governing body. The question should not need asking. There is nothing remotely unusual in the BCCI's ruthless exploitation of power. Remember that ultra-efficient, extremely prejudicial destruction of the Indian Cricket League. The recent fiasco over bonus payments in South African cricket, the squabbles over TV rights and tournament structures in European rugby, the cash-provoked sagas at the IOC and FIFA, and the constant battles between West Indies board and players show that administrative skullduggery is pretty much par for the course. In no other sport, however, is one national body quite so dominant, and hence so able to escape censure even contradiction, especially from within. The BCCI has the power to dictate the dreams of hundreds of millions of people, to decree which can be fulfilled and which cannot. That some of its most eminent and powerful decision makers are or have been politicians does little to bolster public trust. This leads inevitably to the third element of this debate. Has Indian domestic cricket benefited from the wealth of the BCCI? Have infrastructure, player facilities, compensation for domestic players, officials and umpires improved? As someone who's never sadly been to India, I would not wish to be considered an expert on this in any respect. However, according to the reports I've read and the evidence of Indian friends and journalists, the overall picture is not encouraging for defenders of the BCCI. The board, lest we forget, that led the way for the rest of the world after the 1987 World Cup, presciently investing profits in floodlights at major and then even some minor venues. Yes, player salaries in some cases have improved. Even fees for umpires and scorers were recently increased, and substantially so. On the other hand, an investigation a year or so back in the Sunday edition of the Indian Express reported that conditions and facilities at domestic grounds around the country were still primitive, despite each state association receiving annually around $7 million from the IPL alone. Improvements to facilities, where they have been made, seem to be focused on the VIP areas. One pal from Delhi told me that in terms of public toilets, the standards are, and I'm quoting, abysmal. The same word has been used by players to describe their treatment. First-class cricketers in India, wrote that eloquent opener Akash Chopra in his blog in March, have over the years mastered the art of staying in a bubble. If we want to perform, we must learn the art of taking inadequate facilities in our stride, for worrying about them would leave very little time to think about the game. The IPL riches do not appear to have made a jot of difference. Even though players from the first-class circuit have been fretting over what he describes as the abysmal conditions, again, in domestic cricket for years now, Chopra added, "It took a bitter remark from Harbhajan Singh to draw everyone's attention. Harbhajan said that while representing Punjab during a Vijay Hazare Trophy match earlier this year, he found, quote, the condition of the outfield shocking, making sliding and diving while fielding a huge risk. He was apparently completely taken aback by what he called a sorry state of affairs." During a first-class match about 3 years earlier, recalled Chopra by way of further specifics, he and his teammates were told to refrain from using spikes on practice surfaces. When they sought the reason behind such an absurd order, they were informed that the pitches in the practice area would deteriorate beyond repair if they played in spikes. To Chopra, this was rather bizarre. The fact, he continued, that we were preparing for the domestic T20 tournament and were expected to play with spikes in the matches was of no importance. Practicing, especially bowling, in training shoes increases the chances of slipping or twisting an ankle. I don't know about you, but that's not what I call progress. Then there's the N word, nepotism. In 2003, the former India captain Nari Contractor was sacked as Talent Resources Development Officer for West Zone after suggesting that nepotism lay behind A, the inclusion of Rohan Gavaskar, Sunny's son, in the India A team to tour England, and B, the nomination of Brijesh Patel's son Udit for the Border Gavaskar Scholarship to Australia. Gavaskar Jr., Contractor contended, had had far too many chances already for there to be any other explanation for his selection. As far as Udit Patel is concerned, he wondered, how not unreasonably, how can his father, who is the chairman of the Indian Selection Committee, pick his own son for a scholarship abroad? All of which suggests that reflects the respect for the public's intelligence is not high on the list of priorities. Now to what I believe to be the two key facets of this debate. The BCCI and its golden goose, the Indian Premier League, the most economically successful sporting league to emerge since baseball's National League more than a century ago, and easily the most dynamic start-up ever. Will the IPL, and hence 2020 cricket generally, kill Test cricket? Is cricket headed the football way, with clubs at the epicentre? No less worryingly, has India, because of its financial might, become the big brother of international cricket? Is it alienating nations, whether by using that power to win support for measures it would otherwise struggle to get through an ICC vote, undermining or even usurping the ICC itself, or by compelling cricketing decisions to be made for purely commercial reasons. In one respect, as many of my Indian friends seldom tire of pointing out, and justly so, the boot is now on the other non-white foot, and not before time. Cricket, more than any other sport, reflects racial differences. No other international sport, after all, pits non-white against white, former colonialist against ex-slave, with remotely as much regularity. No all-black team has ever dominated football, baseball, basketball or either rugby code, to the extent West Indies did from the mid-70s to the mid-90s. No non-white nation has ever dominated a sport economically in the way India now does. It is a signal achievement, to be honoured and treasured as a symbol of human possibility. But it begs a question. Now it is the most powerful body in cricket, able and happy to defy the governing body on a whim. Is the BCCI guilty of disregarding the wider community? A sense of history, I think, is important here, especially for someone such as myself suffering heavily from a rather larger than average Jewish guilt complex. It always bears reminding ourselves that England and Australia, with support from South Africa, ruled the cricketing roost for a century and more, with an iron hand and a sometimes spiky glove. Since India unexpectedly won the 1983 World Cup, triggering an explosion in the profitability of the one-day format, the upshot of this slow revolution has been a complete shift in the balance of power, one with which Englishmen in particular are struggling plainly to come to terms. Encouraging other nations to improve their playing standards has always of necessity been an obligation for those running the game. The complexities of cricket, unfortunately, allied to the time matches consume, make it a uniquely tricky game to grow. That's why a considerable portion of the revenue generated by the ICC full members via major tournaments and fixtures and those bumper TV deals goes, rightly and properly, to the scores of associate and affiliate members. That's why the ICC's new chief executive, Dave Richardson, a lawyer by trade, apparently felt completely within his rights to state, when asked why the full members would not finance the technological wizardry that underpins the decision review system that has been such a boon both to the cause of natural justice and to the balance of what was threatening to become a grotesque distortion of the game, that ICC funding could not be justified because only a tiny minority of its stakeholders would benefit. That's also why Afghanistan played Australia in September, why MCC sends teams everywhere from Argentina to China to Nepal, and why New Zealand recently played West Indies in Florida. The difficulty arising now is that while the current rate of growth is greater than it has ever been, since Bangladesh became the 10th full member in 1999, Afghanistan, Ireland, Kenya, the Netherlands, Scotland and the UAE have all played official one-day internationals outside World Cups. The financial control exerted by the BCCI, the scheduling choices it makes and the deals it strikes with broadcasters and fellow ICC members such as Australia and South Africa threaten, I believe, such progress. The more ambitious associate nations, most vocally Ireland, have their eyes on joining the Test elite. They also want greater representation at the World Cup. Yet the field for the 2015 was originally reduced from 14 in 2011 to 10, though the subsequent outcry, and not solely from infuriated associated nations, saw the decision rescinded. The cut was prompted by the prolonged nature of the tournament, 6 weeks. But this is only an issue because the broadcasters refuse to countenance more games per day. For the associates, the stay of execution looks unlikely to be more than temporary. The plan remains to pare the entrance back to 10 in 2019. This is symptomatic, of course, of a sport that would appear to most eyes to rely too heavily on rights fees to exert its authority or support the interests of its practitioners. Nowhere is this more palpable than the IPL, a product conceived for television and, in effect, a counter-attraction to the international game. Now, unlike football and the major American ball games, cricket, the first of the truly international team sports, has more than a century prioritised representative tours and fixtures. The higher the standard of play and the more acute and natural the rivalries went the entirely logical reasoning, the bigger the attraction for spectators. A return to the formative days of professional cricket, when domestic matches were the peak attraction in England, is not objectionable in itself, but so deep-rooted are the traditions of the international game, in particular Test cricket, anything that threatens its primacy is bound to arouse confusion among spectators and even players. This has had the happy outcome, I think, of empowering the players. Chris Gale and Kevin Peterson spring most readily to mind. But the upshot has been a diminishing of the national team, the representative and a true and fair representation of the brightest talent. The rapid demise of a number of IPL franchises suggests that the era of city cricket may still be a giant leap of the imagination away. Indeed, there have been reports in the Indian media, based on receding TV audiences and advertising, that the IPL may be actually living on borrowed time, but that may be wishful thinking by those whom it embarrasses. By scheduling the IPL in April and May, during the early phases of the English season, yes, but also clashing with tours both there and elsewhere, the international matches during that period are deprived of key personnel, defrauding spectators and broadcasters alike. The IPL imports, i.e. most of the game's foremost exponents and box office attractions, may now have what is doubtless a welcome choice, yet it is one circumscribed by risk and compromise. Choose the IPL and that may be the end of your international career. Choose your country and the IPL might not come knocking again. Try and ride those two horses with one backside and you could fall between the two. Either way, the public, on whose interest and pockets the game's future ultimately depends, are being shortchanged. The recently unseemly controversies aroused by Mr. Peterson would surely have been diffused, but perhaps not dissolved, given the agendas, entrenched positions and personalities of those involved, had he not been in a position whereby he felt obliged to choose between the England team or his IPL contract. That's why the argument for an IPL window is persuasive and more or less unanswerable, so long as this prompts the BCCI to do its bit for peace by trimming the IPL to a more manageable month. To do so, in my view, would demonstrate that the BCCI has the wider interests of the game at heart, a process it could start by throwing its full weight behind those belated ICC plans for a World Test Championship, postponed from 2013 to 2017 already, mostly because the Champions Trophy, a much unloved one-day tourney, is preferred by broadcasters, but also because of fears that India might not be one of the top 4 nations that qualify. Few lament the fact that the next edition of the Champions Trophy, scheduled to be staged in England next summer, will be the last. Better yet, the BCCI could surrender its obstinate isolationist stance over the decision review system. Even though it is in a minority of one, the BCCI, unswayed by statistics apparently showing that the umpire's decision-making has been shown to have improved where the DRS has been in operation, has today refused to accept the technology as fit for purpose. That has been its stance since the system was trialled first in 2008. In the Test series against Sri Lanka, the Indian team suffered far more grievously in terms of wickets taken or lost, displaying much the worst judgment. Since then, the country's leading players have been divided about the efficacy of the technology, the practicalities and even the desirability of empowering the players to seek justice. There has been one clear benefit, though, to their objections. Adjustments have been made to the technology. The downside, however, lingers. As things stand, because the decision is left to the participants, India have seldom assented to the DRS in test matches. Even when they have, the system has been diluted. As a consequence, a batsman, perversely, can be given out wrongly in Delhi, while on the same day, another can be correctly reprieved in Dhaka. On such perverse, and I would say harmful distinctions, are matches won or lost, careers made or broken. The DRS is the first issue to polarise the ICC quite so starkly. For once, race and old world versus new are utterly irrelevant. This is India versus the rest. If it wants to win the war for hearts and minds, as well as for peckers and pockets, this is one battle the BCCI should be prepared to lose, and gracefully. Perhaps, excuse me, besides, what better way to leave a legacy than to facilitate cricket kind's most important advance, I would suggest, since Kerry Packer started playing the players what they were worth. I wrote those words more than a year ago. They still encapsulate my personal feelings. Closer to home is the BCCI's haughty and somewhat unbrotherly attitude, I would suggest, to Bangladesh, who have yet to play a test match in India. Nor, since attaining full ICC membership, have they even played a one-day international there. It would be naive in the extreme to imagine that this does not have everything to do with box office appeal and money. None of this swaggling is healthy for anyone, as I'm sure Andrew will agree, and I'm sure Mr. Modi might even have agreed. The BCCI isn't responsible for all cricket's ills by any stretch of the imagination. The shift in the balance of power has brought out the worst in many, particularly those Englishmen who would rather live in the past and envy India's riches. I can appreciate all too readily why Mr. Modi has no intention of inviting Giles Clarke, the somewhat provocative chairman of the England and Wales Cricket Board, to his next birthday party. Be placatory, advised Rosie, an erudite low-level gangster in that great Donald Camel-Nick Road movie performance. Had Mr. Clarke been more placatory, the ECB's brief and torrid marriage to that Texan fraudster, Mr. Alan Stanford, would almost certainly have never got beyond the first date. But those ills for which the BCCI is responsible are harder to ignore because they affect everyone who truly cares about this trivial pursuit of ours. The impression, sadly, is that those who run it personify the updated version of C.L.R. James's immortal question, what do they know who only money know? And the answer to that, of course, is one that will be familiar to any fans of Elvis Costello and Bret Easton Ellis in this room: less than zero.
Hardly agree with much of what Rob said there. So what I'm going to do, I'm not so much going to concentrate on the BCCI's ills, as you know, well touched on. I'm going to turn the question on its head for a little bit, first and foremost, and look at some of the splinters that English cricket could perhaps take out of its own eye before criticising others. And I have to say, when I was invited to take part in this seminar, I had a bit of a smirk of recognition when I saw the title of the BCCI's burgeoning revenues harming world cricket. The last time I was involved in a debate of this type was at Lord's in April 2011, and it turned into one of the biggest bum fights I've ever encountered. It was following morning. The Times reported it as UK editor of Cricinfo, as I then was claiming to be speaking on behalf of 1.2 billion Indians, well, which in a moment. And Shilpa Patel, the producer of Test Match Special, summed it up in a very loud heckle from the back of the room. This is bullshit! The event was the Wisden Dinner, annual start of the English season. It was a black tie do in the long room at Lord's. You can imagine the scene. It's the sort of place that people have made decisions about the game for pretty much as long as the game has existed. It just so happened that the choice of debate happened in the week after India just won the World Cup. And so we had this strange juxtaposition of millions of Indians pouring onto Marine Drive in Mumbai to celebrate the moment of victory, billions more elsewhere doing likewise, and 200 white men, effectively, packed into a room. And it felt to me like the last citadel, you know, the hordes outside and very scared men, old establishment men, gathered together to bemoan what has become of our game. And I refused to be part of that, to be honest. I stood up from the back of the room and, you know, with Shilpa's interjection spurring me on, there's a fair amount of red wine in me flowing by the stage, but, you know, got stuck in. And I believe the issues that cropped up in that debate sum up pretty much the issues that the game as a whole are facing. This was Wisden, the old guard, talking about the demise of the relevance of the English season. You know, we're there supposedly to celebrate the start of a new season, but actually not a bit of it. Nobody really cared. Half the journalists are still out in India, to be honest. So the game had clearly moved to different portals. And I myself, actually, my career started out at Wisden. I'm proud to call myself a Wisden journalist, insofar as, you know, it's the same sort of nebulous concept that the spirit of cricket encapsulates. I think Wisden, I like to believe, is, you know, independence of thought and clarity and impartiality, all these sort of things that ought to be part of good journalism, but I think got a little bit bastardised over the years. And part of that bastardisation, funny enough, occurred with the growth of Cricinfo, which became very much a very big part of Wisden, and as I'm sure everyone in this room now knows, is no longer part of Wisden. They were briefly in the same stable, and there were some serious battles within the setup of Wisden and Cricinfo to decide, you know, we may be the internet interlopers, so to speak, but you know what, we've got a bigger audience, bigger relevance, bigger markets, bigger potential. We're going it alone, and you know, you can adapt or become irrelevant. And so, you know, in many ways, I find myself in a strange position in journalism, and I'm sure Rob agrees with this as well. That, you know, we speak in a very privileged position that we've had to speak through Cricinfo to an audience that the English game doesn't ever encounter, and this, I think, is where the ills begin. Right at this minute, there's more money swirling around in English cricket than perhaps ever before. You know, they've sold off their domestic coverage to Sky, raking millions through that deal, and yet the money swirling around doesn't quite swirl around so far as to get counties out of financial peril. There have never been more counties in English cricket facing bankruptcy. And this is largely because they're being encouraged to build higher and harder, build grand stadiums, you know, build them and they will come. What's going to come? The English cricket team cannot play anymore. They've already playing too many matches as it is. And there was this great opportunity, the advent of 2020 cricket, for English cricket to seize the nettle, create a new dynamic that would, you know, turn the finances of the domestic game on its head and create a relevance for domestic cricket that simply doesn't exist at the moment. I'm no county diehard myself. I grew up in Dorset. I developed no great affinity with either of my neighbours, Hampshire or Somerset. In fact, my affinity, as far as it went, was to follow Middlesex because Angus Fraser played there, Worcester because Graham Hick played there, and Essex for Graham Gooch. My fandom, as it was entirely personality-led. Right at this moment, I've put out the latest issue of the Cricket magazine, and we've got a little rewind section looking back to when Warwickshire won the treble in 1994. And it just so happens I looked down a list of a picture, doing the caption for a photo of the team, the 12 men who won the championship. I can name every single one of them. You know, Asif Din, Dermot Reeve, Dominic Osler, you know, names that would mean nothing, I believe, right now. If people were asked to look at the same picture of the championship winning team of Warwickshire right at this moment, would they be able to recognise more than 2 or 3? I doubt it. Just this week, the ECB announced their latest revamp to their domestic structure. Yet another revamp. 50 over cricket is back. Interesting that it never went away in the first place. It started playing 40 over cricket, so just for some perverse reason. They've started playing county championships on Sundays, starting on Sundays, which is a good thing. But the most interesting for me is a shift to playing 2020 crickets on Fridays only. You know, Fridays, maybe Thursdays if you're coming up against in London with big sporting weekends to come. The idea of having this block of 2020 games, you know, great big block in the middle, it's no good anymore, because English cricket has missed the boat in that regard. It's got to draw people to come to Friday matches, which is all very well, but are they going to draw the big names, the Lasseth Malingas, the Chris Scales? Are you going to encourage them to come to play one Friday a week for the entire season? It's not going to happen. English cricket is no longer going to be able to make anything of 2020 cricket to the same extent that the IPL has made of it. And it could have been so different. In 2008, Keith Bradshaw, the hugely progressive chief executive of MTC, and the Surrey chairman, David Stewart, came up with this radical proposal for a franchise league. It was going to be 9 teams, bear in mind there are 18 counties, 9 teams drawn from the best of county and world talent, hosted at the largest stadium in the country, because, you know, these teams have been encouraged to build massive grounds and have massive overheads, so therefore it's in their interest, the Yorkshires and the Trent Bridges and the Edgbastons, to get the people the biggest gates. It makes sense. But crucially, for this to happen, it would have required the consent of 30 members of the ECB board, which basically encompasses all the first-class counties and the minor counties as well. So there would have been opportunities within the negotiations there for the wealth to be spread, not just through the county system, but down to the grassroots, down to the Devons and the Cumberlands and the various other counties that never see a penny. It would have been life-changing in so many other ways, because grounds like New Road in Canterbury wouldn't be forced to flog their practice nets to supermarkets in order to keep up with the Joneses next door. Unfortunately, this document, in its formative stage, was leaked in the middle of a test match, trashed before it had been read, and then a couple of days later they announced a new proposal of the English Premier League consisting of 2 teams of 10, where they'd added two more counties. In fact, I believe there were 2 Stamford teams. We'll come to that in a separate moment, but you really couldn't make it up. The entrenchment of the English establishment is unworkable in what is, frankly, a minority sport in global terms, until you factor in India. Now, the IPL worked, not because of the franchises, Rajasthan Royals, whatever. The personalities were what made it. The story of the Rajasthan Royals' first victory was the fact that Shane Warne made such a triumphant return. The concept was credible, because like in World Series cricket in the 1970s, the players were the people who made it work. Tony Gregg, who was speaking at the MCC Spirit of Cricket lecture a few months ago, and I mean that in itself is quite a turnaround given his name's been dragged through the mud over the years. He recalled how, prior to that initial part of the revolution, he'd spent his entire match fee for the centenary test in 1977 on paying for tickets for his family to come and watch it. So there's a limit to how much retrenchment this game can afford. 10 years ago, the ECB had, in 2020 cricket, the single most potent formula for reinvention that the game has ever known. It's pretty rich to start blaming India for swiping the elixir if England never wanted it in the first place. Which brings us to Kevin Peterson. Because whatever the rights and wrongs of his dispute, and personally I don't for a moment believe that anything that's happened within that dressing room couldn't have been sorted out by a right hook. Talking to one of his teammates the other night, he made the point that not once in nearly a decade as teammates in the test team have those two gone out for dinner together. That hasn't stopped them finishing number 1, winning the Ashes home and away. It hasn't stopped either of them being very important match-winning players on the field. The impertinence of Peterson's current situation is that he knows his market value and is prepared to have his cake and eat it. And unfortunately, that's what arrogant, preening sporting stars do. Cristiano Ronaldo wants to go to Madrid, so be it. He goes to Madrid. It's the way of the world. And those who resist market forces do so at their peril. I mean, this summer, we witnessed the miracle of the London Olympics, and sports fans all over the country found themselves wishing that more sportsmen could be like those nice, modest rowers and cyclists and gymnasts and what have you. But yet, as someone who lived in the Olympic borough of Hackney and watched the IOC machine going to work before it all began, our local shop, for instance, had managed to rename itself Olympic about 2 years earlier. Olympics shop, good idea. Not going to happen. By the time the Olympics happened, it just had a bare front with neon lights, nothing else on it. So the arrogance was fully visible for those who go looking for it. The belief that you are the best player, or the best show on earth, in the case of the Olympics, turns out to be a self-fulfilling prophecy in many cases. KP earned $2 million from his punditry stint during the recent World 2020, a situation that neatly encapsulates, for me, the absurdity of England's reactionary stance there. No doubt he regrets not having a chance to defend his title that his man-and-match efforts had secured in 2010 when England won the World 2020. But ultimately he's an elite athlete with a finite shelf life and an acute awareness that the good times won't roll forever unless he grabs his opportunities. And the fact that he's extremely good at his new job as a pundit suggests that the short-term disappointment has already probably been outweighed by the long-term opportunities that will present him when he actually retires in 4 or 5 years' time. So, that is the state that we're in. The IPL has grabbed an opportunity. The English Cricket Board has thrown an opportunity away. And I don't believe there's any point in trying to scramble back that lost ground for England. English cricket has got to adapt to new realities. And that's just a fact of business, and business is unfortunately a fact of sport these days. But I still believe there is more to sport than mere money. I was speaking to Virat Kohli for an interview for next month's December's issue of The Cricketer. And I found him a hugely impressive young man who's surely the captain in waiting. And I put it to him that his generation of Indians on the field plays with a strut and an arrogance that personifies the Indian national psyche in the 21st century. And he grabbed that. He completely agreed. He recognises that, you know, there's no backing down anymore. You know, back in the day, I remember growing up, India were a soft touch, frankly. In a way that Pakistan used to beat us every year, India would get hammered by us most years, unless we went out to India thinking we were going to win. That's another thing entirely. Some things never change. But you know, Kohli says that he doesn't want to back down from any fight, and yet, you know, his education within cricket is incomplete. He's played just 40 first-class games, 10 of those in Test cricket, and he's a man who wants to play more Test cricket. You know, I've heard many people give platitudes about the sanctity, the pinnacle of Test cricket. When he spoke about it, I believed him. I believe this was a man who wanted to test the mind, the body, the soul, and the technique in a format that no other, in my opinion, no other sport in any form, perhaps excepting the Tour de France, can replicate. I think he wants that opportunity. What he doesn't want, like so many other of the elite athletes in cricket, is the dross that goes between it. And this, in turn, leads to the biggest sticking point for me when it comes down to where cricket goes with India ruling the roost and England having to adapt to new realities, are those May Test matches that Rob touched on just now. With, you know, this is the absolute nub of the KP dispute, which in turn, I believe, is the absolute nub of the dispute that is the balance of power fight going on at the moment. If England persists in playing Test matches in May, at the height of the IPL, it is going to be debasing the very product that it claims to hold most dear to it. England likes to put out this belief that Test cricket is the pinnacle and it is the guardian of that pinnacle. But for so long as they play Test matches, 7 Test matches a year, starting in May, they are going to ruin their own product. Let's have a look at the evidence of what has been played, because let's not forget, this isn't even a tradition for English cricket. There's an awful lot about English cricket that is traditional, and God bless it for that. But you know, when in my childhood, the second week of June was quite early enough to start the test calendar. Since 2000, for some reason, they decided, no, let's have 7 tests a summer and start in May. So who have we had in that time? We had an outclassed Zimbabwe, came over in 2000 and 2003. An outclassed Bangladesh outfit in 2005 and 2010, and bearing in mind that, you know, the pitches in May are particularly friendly to seam and swing bowlers of the type that England do particularly well, it queers the pitch even further. You know, if you're going to bring those teams over, surely it ought to be at the height of the summer, such as it exists in this day and age. We had in 2009, things got even worse, obviously, because Zimbabwe were ruled out for political reasons, so Sri Lanka were invited. Sri Lanka said, no, we're playing the IPL, and the likes of Jayawardene and Sangakkara had enough clout to make it happen. So in come West Indies. And Chris Gale, who, you know, we'll hear about more in a moment, but, you know, he flew in from playing for Kolkata Knight Riders in the IPL the night before a Lord's Test match. It was a debacle. Nobody cared. Nobody cared that England won. Nobody cared that the teams were touring. Next summer, we've got New Zealand coming, who were the low-key visitors in 2004 and 2008. So there's clearly a pattern that's been forming throughout these years. And they'll be coming next year, straight off the back of a tour of New Zealand. So, and then squeeze into a summer that includes the Champions Trophy a couple of weeks later, and then the Ashes. So there's nothing about those tests that is remotely alluring to players, to fans, and least of all, surely, to the administrators. In 2009, Chris Gale was famously quoted as saying he wouldn't be so sad if Test cricket died out. Admittedly, he was a bit of a honey trap, of the type that he's particularly susceptible to, but you know, he said it. He tried his best to back down from having said it, but he didn't. And yet, this was a man who scored 317 in a test against South Africa. And the following year, having said this, he came back and scored 333 in Gaul. And now he's got 2 triple centuries. Are we really supposed to believe that this is a man who does not like the challenge of being as good as he possibly can be in any particular format of the game? What he, like everyone else involved, and I include journalists here, one of the main reasons why I moved away from Cricinfo. I mean, counterintuitive step, I know, to go from online to print, but it was the treadmill. I was happy not to have to go around the world watching endless test matches in different parts of the world. You know, my kids growing up without a father, that sort of thing. I'm quite happy to go and run a magazine, and it is what it is. It is too much. Chris Gale's triumph in the World 2020 recently was, I believe, one of the greatest things that could have happened to cricket at the moment. Because I think what that shows, A, the fact that 2020 cricket has a way of reaching out to disenfranchised parts of the global game. I mean, ever since the dereliction of duty that West Indies Cricket Board oversaw in the 1980s, when they had arguably the greatest surge of natural talent ever to come through any sport, and they let it go by because they assumed that this would happen all the time. You're going to get your Malcolm Marshalls and your Viv Richards, they just come up like that, easy peasy. No, not so easy peasy. But they let that go by, and then ever since then they've been wondering how on earth can we fill this void. Funnily enough, the man who started to fill the void, and when it comes to questioning the burgeoning revenues of people, Alan Stanford's a good place to start. In 2006, he started to reinvigorate West Indies cricket by providing monetary incentives to play well. Shocking idea. But these guys started to see the opportunity from on an island to island basis. Here's a pinnacle. You can aim for $1 million if you win this tournament. If that's not going to encourage you to knuckle down and train and be as good as you can be, what will? Now suddenly we have this case where Chris Gale comes out of exile and effectively, notwithstanding his performance in the final, but effectively inspires West Indies to the title. Where KP is regarded as a pariah for chasing the money, Gale actually stands as an inspiration to all those who seek a route out of poverty within the Caribbean. Cricket now finally has a man who can show you, look, you can do this. You can go and seize the money. You're not going to be like Viv Richards, Viv Richards is possibly not the right example, but there are several others. I mean, in fact, I think we're going to be doing a piece next year about the Rebel Tour, the West Indies Rebels who went to South Africa in 1983. Half of them living below the poverty line. It is a very sad tale for so many of them, but they needed to make an income somehow. Here is an inspiration that there is an income to be made, and that ultimately is what sport is about in many ways. For in this new business-led ethos, where it's not so much for the love of the game anymore; it's for the money that you can make out of the game. And there's plenty to be made in cricket, and a lot of that is thanks to the immense potential of the BCCI's revenue streams. And I conclude by reiterating I'm no BCCI apologist. I haven't mentioned much of the stuff that Rob mentioned because there's no need to. I agree with it wholeheartedly, and anyone who's ever read my Cricinfo articles over the years will also conclude that. I wrote in at the height of their debacle on the England tour last summer that Indian cricket was becoming a laughingstock, and I believed that, and I still believe that, because again, this comes back to a point that I saw in Kohli's responses, that the big danger for Indian cricket is if you are going to put all your faith in a product that is effectively no more than a domestic club competition. Suddenly you're no longer putting forward a team that is representing that new thrusting, upwardly mobile society. If India's fortunes in international cricket don't improve, and I'm sure they'll be a whole lot better on home soil than they were overseas, but if they don't improve on the whole, they risk exposing the whole edifice and the whole lie or myth on which the IPL is built. It's like markets that stampede at the first sign of trouble. Sponsors and broadcasters are likely to think, India's not quite such a hot ticket after all, if the one thing that they are judged by on a global scale, their opponents overseas, don't agree with their own belief that they are the best. So, I resent their resistance of this move towards World Test Championship. That's, as Rob said, currently slated for 2017, but I'm not holding my breath on that one. But their paranoia there that they don't want to subscribe to a format that shock horror might not involve them at the sharp end is one thing. But when in 2005 England and Australia contested the greatest Ashes series of all time, #1 v #2, I can vouch for the fact that India was hooked because I was out there for some of it. If the schedule's freed up to allow excellence to flow in whatever form, and excellence being excellence in the IPL, excellence in Test cricket, and excellence in whatever other formats fit into the gaps that can be created, there's absolutely no reason why the game cannot thrive under a leadership that is, let's face it, 70% of the income is already Indian, and considering more of that is already, the supporters already Indian. It is an Indian sport now, and it has to be embraced as such. Thank you.